Good evening. Let's go ahead and get started. Thanks for coming out tonight. Thanks to all those watching online. For those watching online, make sure you put your questions in the chat box. I'm going to make my announcements brief tonight so we can spend more time with our guest speaker. I would like to point out that we have a fresh batch of t-shirts and hats and some really neat new colors, and they're up there on the table right outside there, so check them out. So announcement Saturday, May 16th, which is next Saturday, as a follow-up to tonight's speaker or tonight's presentation. We're going to take a field trip to the Amache site at the Amache internment camp near Granada for the annual pilgrimage and sharing a history. If you're interested in the flyers on that back table right outside there, and with more info, and you can also email me if you need more info, or you can email me if you would like to attend. Our June field trip will be to the Bear Basin Ranch near Westcliff. On this trip, we'll be viewing archaeological and historical sites. So keep your eye out for an email blast that hasn't been sent out yet, but it's coming. And if you remember our April speaker, Gary Ziegler, who spoke on Peru, this will be a field trip to his ranch, which has lots of archaeology and historical sites. Also in June, don't forget to join our Pause book discussion group. We'll be discussing the book, The Golden Spruce by John Gallant. It's a true story of myth, madness, and greed, and a work of environmental nonfiction. The discussion will be by Zoom on June 22nd at 6:30 p.m. Make sure you're reading the midden. And if you're not getting the midden, which is the Pause bi-monthly newsletter, there's a sign-up sheet on that table right outside. If you get the midden, make sure you read it. In our last issue, there's a report on the dating of the pictograph that is part of our Pause display at the museum, which includes our logo. Also, there's some answers in there to some of the questions that were asked of our March speaker, Elizabeth Dodd, that she was unable to answer at the top. So make sure you're getting your midden and reading it. May is Archaeology and History Preservation Month. And to celebrate that, we always have a special speaker. And I'm pleased tonight to introduce our guest speaker, Charles Fugate. Charles? Charles is a master's candidate at the University of Denver, studying the intersection of food, power, economics within carceral environments. You might have to define that word for us. He has some digs in the Upper Peninsula. He's done some digs in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, Denver City Park, and will be a crew chief at the Amache Natural Historic Site during this 2026 field season. These experiences have informed various presentations on his multidisciplinary work, including sessions at professional conferences and guest lectures at universities. Currently, he is working to finish his degree, which involves collaborating with Japanese Arts Network on a food-based art project, and Charles hopes to get into education once he finishes his degree. Please welcome Charles Fugate.
Hear me? Do you see me? No. Okay. Okay. Is that better? Perfect. Okay. Awesome. Well, again, thank you so much, Doug and Pause, for having me. And welcome to my talk on the history of community refugee camps, a talk on the history and archaeology of Amache. Amache is often better known as the Granada Relocation Center. And we're going to see why they have two different names. Second, but this was a camp for Japanese Americans during World War II. Let's see. move on to my first question. So who here knows anything about Japanese American internment during World War II? Ideas. Okay, perfect. You guys are a fantastic group, because most Americans unfortunately do not know. We do not know this, quite honestly, shameful period in our history in which people were incarcerated for nothing more than where they were born or their nationality or ethnicity. So in today, let's say 2025, they did a poll where they asked if the US's actions during World War II, specifically around Japanese internment, was justified, and more Americans still noted that that the incarceration of Japanese Americans was in fact justified. However, this is down from 99% during 1945, in which almost unanimously all Americans, except for a select few who we're going to be talking about here in a second, violent or not violently, but also many people still continue to buy the wartime propaganda around Japanese Americans, whether it's in terms of deference, whether it's in terms of concepts like honor and kind of being a fifth column for the emperor. A lot of people still kind of have that mindset, so it's important to keep in mind as we go forward. Also, a small note on vocabulary here. Many people in the US or in this space describe this as incarceration, as people are being imprisoned, and even though there has been no crime committed. During this time, in 1942 to 1945, the US government calls it internment, which is not super accurate, but it is what you find in all of the official documentation. Additionally, there are many people within the Japanese American community, survivors and descendants of the camps, who do call it a concentration camp. As academics, we prefer incarceration, just to kind of be down that middle of the road, just to keep as many people happy as possible. So also noting vocabulary, we have Issei, Nisei, and Sansei. Issei are Japanese American people who were born in Japan but would live in the US. This is the first generation. Nisei are the second generation, being born in the United States, and then Sansei are third generation and beyond. And also for the camp, it's called, it kind of has two ways of saying the name, Amache and Amache. We'll get again to the story of Amache or Amache later, but she is a Native American princess. But it is chosen because of some issues within the post system. Amache is, oh, I am so sorry. I'm so sorry. So basically, one, Amache is the katakana way of formatting the name of Amache Prowers into something that could be legible in for Japanese and American speakers. So before internment, Japanese Americans have a very, very long and storied history within the United States. We're going to go through, unfortunately, a little bit quickly, but basically in 1853, Commodore Perry opens up Japan to trading, and it quickly modernizes and industrializes. However, this means that for second sons and sons of second sons, people, there's too many people for the land. And so they start to look elsewhere, and 10,000 about come to America through Hawaii to work on sugar plantations. Others come to places like Denver to work and lumber yards, as well as railroads. And the Japanese Americans especially kind of hit their stride in migration around the time of the Chinese Exclusion Act. China also had been recently opened up, and there were many, many people who wanted to migrate and work, specifically thinking about places like the Transcontinental Railroad. However, there is substantial racism and hardships for these individuals. And so it is by about the 1860s that exclusion acts are placed on the Chinese, and the Japanese then in turn come and start working in a lot of those positions, again, on the railroads, cooking, things like that. And a lot of these are single men. They are here to make some money and then send it home, but eventually later on into the decade, they start bringing over families and start settling in colonies, like in Livingston in California. However, eventually the Yellow Peril and concerns about Japanese American owned businesses catches up with the Japanese American community, specifically on the West Coast. They are barred from owning most prime land for farming, as well as for doing commerce in large cities. However, Colorado has no such laws. So the Japanese American community here really thrived, especially in Denver, but all over the state. Additionally, even though they were barred from the kind of good cropland, they were able to be fantastic agriculturalists. Again, living in places like the Central Valley, where they owned less than 4% of California's farmland in 1940, but produced more than 10% of the total value of the state's produce at that time. So they are really, really doing good about things, but nothing can last. 1941, December 7th, we have Pearl Harbor, a day that will live in infamy for many of us, but also it creates the catalyst for repression against the Japanese American community. There are commissions that are done later on in the war and after the war, but there has been no documented evidence that any Japanese American citizen participated in the Pearl Harbor attacks, either in terms of reconnaissance or spying, and they have one of the lowest sabotage rates for enemy combatants during the war. So there is absolutely no reason for Anglo-Americans and Americans at large to be afraid of Japanese Americans. However, their relative prosperity and non-whiteness really makes them a target during this period. So before the executive order, which mandates the creation of these relocation camps, comes through, many Japanese Americans are targeted by their friends and neighbors. In places like Hawaii, prominent businessmen and members of the community are being rounded up by the police and more or less indefinitely detained until they're put into these relocation camps. Phones were tapped, and life kind of just ground to a halt. And this was until February 19th, 1942. So 1941, end of the year, Pearl Harbor happens. Within a couple of months, really, the government, pressured by West Coast business owners and politicians, they sign into law Executive Order 9066, which authorizes military commanders to exclude civilians from military areas. And you can see that kind of zone over there on the right, which encompasses most of California, Oregon, and Washington. While this did not specifically note any race which was being rounded up, it was specifically and only used on Japanese Americans. So we've got some numbers here of each of the camps that the WRA created. The WRA is, of course, the World Relocation Authority. This was created through Executive Order 9066, specifically to deal with the incarceration of Japanese Americans. So you can see here, it's over 120,000 people. So this is 120,000 business owners, farmers, friends, neighbors, being removed from cities all across the West Coast. And so the camp that we're focusing on and that is in Colorado is Amache. It is the actually one of the smaller ones. The larger ones are primarily in California, which makes sense because that's where a large portion of the population already is. This is a very quick process. So basically what happens is, again, you have 120,000 people that you need to move into these camps. So you start by rounding them up, and this mainly happens at places of worship, churches. It happens at city halls, and people get onto buses or trains, and they go to relocation centers. And so these are kind of the interstitial places between Japanese Americans living happily in their own towns and these relocation centers like Amache. So these are often on places like racetracks or fairgrounds. So these are not places that are meant for long-term human use and recreation. Again, one is on a racetrack for horses, and they are in stables, literally. They are in places that are not meant for them. But these are very, very liminal times as they are building up the camps. And the camps themselves are built in a military style primarily. So, it is a set of barracks set around a mess hall and a latrine, basically. So great for housing, combatants and things like that, but not great for families and people who were living peacefully in their homes just moments before. However, people were allowed to take exactly one bag worth of their belongings with them. This often led to things being buried in front yards in hopes that they could recover it later. People making pacts with their non-Japanese American neighbors in order to keep paying the mortgage, or simply just selling it off or destroying it so nobody else could have it. And again, it's really telling. And as we get into some of the archaeology here, we can discuss this, what people thought was important and what people took. A lot of it, some of it was seeds. People are bringing heirloom seeds there. They're bringing toys for their kids. Ceramics, especially ceramic eating dishes, are very, very important. And we see that a lot in the archaeological record as well. But again, these people are leaving behind land, they're leaving behind businesses, and a lot of the times they do not make it through the war. It goes into foreclosure, and that is ultimately sold off to another group or individual. So just a little brief history of Japanese American incarceration. It's really brief, to be honest. It is only 3 years from 1942 to 1945. However, when this was going on, people didn't know that. The people who were being ripped from their homes did not know that they were going to be heading back in that little amount of time. And certainly these camps were also made to last. They were, again, in military fashion and also made out of fairly hardy concrete. But yeah, so 1942 bombing of Pearl Harbor and the very quick, or 1941 Pearl Harbor, fairly quick, going into Executive Order 9066, and the incarcerees are very quickly funneled into the camps. However, this is a very difficult time, especially at somewhere like Amache, which again opens in about October of 1942, which is right before winter. And of course, these are all people from the West Coast who are fairly used to nice, decent, warm weather and not windstorms and freezing cold weather. So there's a lot of learning that has to be done, especially even in terms of the landscape. over this period of time in 1942. This is also when the 100th Battalion is formed, which is an all-Japanese American unit which fought in the Pacific Theater. They recruited heavily from Amache as well as from other sites. But this kind of also highlights kind of the schism in Japanese American thought during this time, as some thought it would be best to assimilate and become more American, and others were rightfully upset that they were being prejudiced and put upon because of their race and ethnicity. So while there's also the 100th Battalion, there were also the No-No Boys. So what happened is, as you go into camp, you have to fill out a series of questions about, what you, where you live, but also like your fealty to the U.S. government. And there were two questions that would immediately put you into another form of Japanese American incarceration camp for these defectors. And those were called the No-No Boys because those two questions would immediately disqualify you. So they knew they would be removed from the general public and from all these places, but they were still they wanted to have their voices heard about the dissatisfaction with the U.S. government. So 1943, not a lot going on. This is the middle of the war. People are really not sure kind of which way the wind will blow in terms of who's going to win, who's going to come out on top. And by 1944, we continue to have incarceration, but we also have Karematsu versus the United States, which is a Supreme Court. Yeah, there we go. That is widely regarded as one of the worst court decisions of all time, but basically they rule on the side of the U.S. government and say that racially based incarceration is allowable under U.S. law. Again, there's been a lot of debate that I am too unintelligent to understand about that legally, but the courts uphold it. But it is kind of this first crack in the regimen of incarceration at the time, especially since the kind of hysteria of 1941 and Pearl Harbor had subsided by now. And then 1945 and onward, we see the surrender of Germany. In August, the U.S. drops 2 of the nuclear bombs on Nagasaki and Hiroshima. And then by autumn of 1945, many of the camps begin to close. And this is a very slow process. Again, people don't really have homes or farms or places of employment to go back to. So for in the months and even for some people years afterwards, they're still trying to find work during this time. And it's also during this time that people are trying to figure out what to do with the rest of their lives. So we'll get into this while I discuss Amache. But in Denver specifically, there's no exclusion order. So the Japanese Americans who were living here, who were working on the railroads and in the mines and places like that, they're able to maintain their institutions. So many people ended up staying close by, especially in the more eastern states, because there was already that community there. So Amache, like I said earlier, this is one of the smaller camps within the regimen of incarceration. However, it is one of Colorado's largest cities during this period of time. It holds about 7,000 people at one time, but about 10,000 people overall pass through it. And it is interesting because it is one of the only camps that is taken off of private landowners. Almost every other camp that the WRA created was created on government land of some sort. This was taken through eminent domain, partially through Dust Bowl politics. in order to create this, again, a huge city in what was essentially a sleepy farming town. But this is also really important because Ralph Carr, who was the governor at the time, was one of the few political figures, especially out west, who was not pro internment, but pro having internees within Colorado. The person I always like to compare him to is the governor of Idaho at the time, who, when they were having the discussions for where to place the camps, he said, not verbatim, if you send Japanese American people here, you will find them hanging from every tree. So in contrast with that, Ralph Carr is saying these are Americans, these are as patriotic citizens as you or I, and he really helps kind of kickstart a lot of Amachians' relationship to the agricultural area of Prowers County. So spatially, Amache is located out there on the eastern part of the plains, of the High Plains, kind of east of us here at Pueblo, southeast of Denver. They are very connected into the rail network. In fact, that's how many people originally get there. And again, we have this kind of barracks military style layout to the camp itself. And we also have this area down here for all of the personnel, because there are about 100 or so basic, white military age people helping to run the camp as well. Even though all of the day-to-day facilities are really staffed by the people of Amache. So everybody cooking the food, everybody doing the laundry, there is a silk print shop, there are victory gardens and agricultural kind of plots, and all of those are manned by the Amachians. They can only get about $7 a week. Their pay is pegged to the pay of the lowest salary of an army recruit at the time. And this was to kind of abate. There are many accusations that the people in these camps, and specifically Amache, were getting too much money and getting too much resources, which of course was not true, but it caused a lot of backlash in a lot of newspapers. And so what happened is they had set this standard maximum wage, basically. But I mean, they essentially ran the camp themselves, including also a co-op. But what they would do with that money is they could go into town, which was Grenada. It was about a mile and a little bit away. So you could go there on foot, and that's where there was a fish market, there was a coffee shop, there was a grocery store, and these two kind of sister towns basically had a reciprocal relationship during this time, because there were so many new people and so many new sources of income. And here, so Amache is named after Amache Prowers. Her husband is the namesake of the county that Amache is in. He was a famous cattleman. She was a Native American princess. Her father was actually killed at the Sand Creek Massacre, which only happened about, I'm bad with distances, but a short distance away, about 20 minutes away by car. And they decided to call it Amache because not only in her honor, but because with so many new people in the area, there's a lot of mail going to Grenada. And one of them was the Granada Relocation Center. The other one was the town. So they decided to rename the Relocation Center to make it easier for people to get their mail. And there was a lot of mail during that time. Although it was heavily scanned, again, by the US government as it left. Again, 640 acres. Again, a lot of that is agricultural land. A lot of the people who were in Amache were from either urban Los Angeles or from the Central Valley, and so they used a lot of their expertise to grow very important cash crops for the region. They grew celery out on the Eastern Plains, which I don't know if anyone here has grown celery. It takes a lot of time and it takes a lot of water. So, I mean, to do that out at Amache where you're not having a lot of water and you're in a new place is absolutely incredible. And we also have a lot of institutions that are going on at Amache. So we've got the Boy Scouts. One of the funniest archaeology stories is we find all of these kind of unrelated arrowheads all the time when we do pedestrian survey, which is super interesting, but it's like, this wasn't a known area for these groups. And for the longest time, we couldn't figure it out. And it's because the Boy Scouts, they went to Mesa Verde on a field trip. And they were out there, lithic hunting, and they brought them all back. And, they must have lost them or, something over time. And they turn up in the archaeological record. And it's those kind of aha moments that kind of really make it special, kind of working at sites like this. But also at Amache, we have places like Catholic Church. There's kind of a saying, especially among Japanese Americans at the time, is like, 10% of us are Catholic, 30% of us are like Protestant, 80% of us are Buddhist, and 100% of us are Shinto. So, I mean, there's a lot of different belief systems and things that are coming into contact. Because you also have to think for some of these people, this is the first time they've been around people like them. They might have been in all white or Anglo kind of communities, and especially, during the Yellow Peril, but also during that kind of bit after Pearl Harbor, the world was a scary place for them. And there was a lot of vigilante violence. So this kind of, while they were forced to be here and it was terrible and, they had to do a lot of work to make it habitable for themselves, it was also a place of safety. For them. And, it was a concentration of Japanese American culture. There's some stories of some kids who had never seen, sumo before, or, who had never had like sukiyaki. And for the first time, they're around people who are like, oh, you've never had that? They're sharing all of these things. And actually there are reports that show that people who were incarcerated have a greater chance of participating still in kind of Japanese American culture compared to those who were not forcibly removed. So again, I also really wanted to talk about the food at Amache because that's my kind of area of expertise, well, I'm trying to get there. But food was centered mostly around the mess halls, and this was a lot of canned foods and not a lot of meat. Again, like I said, there was this huge outcry when people outside of the camps see all of these container cars filled with meat going into camp, which again, to them makes sense until you realize that there's about 7,000 people who need to be fed all in one day. So it's a lot of meat, but not in comparison. But people don't see that, and they get very upset. So the military and the WRA, they mandate that most meals are meatless, but at camp they are also raising pigs and chickens and beef as well. And they're making so much of it that they're able to actually export it as well, mostly to other camps. And when they do this, they lower the average price of a meal at Amache from about 45 cents to about 25 cents with all of the food that they're growing, which again, they don't really see a whole bunch of benefit from monetarily, but they are able to access much better quality foods being grown locally. And like I said, they were fantastic agriculturalists. They worked to save the 1943 wheat crop, which was so important for the war effort because sugar beets are used to make sugar, which is then used in plastics and rubbers and gunpowder, all of which is critical to the war effort. And again, a lot of this was either unpaid labor or underpaid labor. But again, it's kind of harkening back to that idea that a lot of them do want to be seen as patriotic Americans. And so they do a lot of this kind of like really, really important work for the war effort, even in terms of food. And again, like I said, they're making so much food that they're canning their own tomatoes and tofu and all of these other things. And I was kind of taken aback to see tofu, but we got our hands on some old menus. And as time goes on, you actually see a lot more kind of culturally relevant foods enter the menus. So things like rice, things like tofu. It's actually in 1945, I believe it's 75% of the rice being bought inside the United States is being bought by the U.S. government and the WRA because they're feeding all of these Japanese Americans. So again, food is kind of really, really plugged into the Amache experience. Foods like mochi, which is kind of these squished rice balls that are eaten around holidays, and then things that like sake, which is fermented rice wine, are kind of also key to the landscape and the experience of Amache. Again, things like, state Shinto was, people couldn't really practice it in public because that was the official state religion of Imperial Japan at the time. But in the gardens that we see at Amache, there are broken sake jars because when you give offerings to the spirits, you kind of knock the top off of whatever you're giving. So we're able to find that through archaeology and history. And it kind of really sets the stage for how important food is to people in terms of resilience and staying kind of upbeat in very, very trying times. Again, they don't know that the war is going to end in 3 years. They could be here for some people, they think they could be there forever, and that is not going to end. So, by having food, by having celebrations and birthdays and picnics, it really helps people to reorient and be resilient in the face of terrible, terrible event. And then for community, like I said, community is huge at Amache. People, it's a small town, it's 7,000 people. It is, they're setting up baseball fields and sumo fields. They also find sake by the sumo ring. So it's not all religious. Some of it's just for fun. But again, a lot of the people who are going to Amache are from the same neighborhoods. They are from the same families. In fact, I helped to run a block tour for the pilgrimage, which you all should go to last year. And we had these two groups, and they were like, one last one, we wanted to take a picture at one last block before we head out. And they're like, we want to do this one because it was my uncle's. And they're like, we want to do that one because it's our uncle's. And they're like, they had no idea that they were, distantly related cousins, but that you get a lot of that, at Amache as people are kind of brought together that were kind of this, had been all over the country beforehand. Like I said, yeah, we've got this concentration of Japanese Americans in one spot of, culture, people learning. There's some really great photos, which, I think it might be that one there on the right that's a little blurry. But you have all of these like prom photos of people in their kind of like Japanese American best before going to prom. And people are really kind of finding out things that had been, inaccessible to them before that. So I wanted to talk a little bit also about archaeology, specifically at Amache. The University of Denver and Dr. Bonnie Clark, who runs the field schools every other year, we've been doing archaeological digs at this site, which is now a National Historic Site, for about 20 years now. And We do field schools every other year, where we take in members of the descendant communities of the towns of Grenada and Lamar, which are close by. And we go through and we do a pedestrian survey as well as excavation, usually in line with master's students' work every year. So this year, like I said, I'm looking primarily at things like food. So I'm looking at tin cans. Right now, I'm doing a tin can typology to understand what people were eating. And then the other crew chief who will be there is working on the Junior Ranger booklet and looking at how we communicate difficult histories to specifically children. So yeah, so like I said, it's very community oriented. We have both students and volunteers. That woman in the hat on the left is Carlene Tinker. She was about 2 or 3 when she was incarcerated. And she has been a fantastic boon for this organization. Oh yeah, that's her in 1943 and then in 2010, which is pretty crazy. But you know, for a lot of people, this sort of work is very healing, or it kind of puts them into kind of dialogue with, you know, long dead relatives who, you know, can't really talk back or never talked about the experience when they were alive, which happens a lot. But we work with the NPS and kind of a couple of other organizations to kind of put this on. And it's a fantastic experience. It's over 4 weeks, and we work Monday through Saturday, and it's a fantastic time. And we are actually doing a public day this July 4th. So if you're in the area, we'd love to have you guys. We do artifact washing, we do kind of interpretive tours, and then the day before is for the community. So we'll have, again, more descendants and survivors come out, and we do block tours and things like that. And I'm actually looking at doing a reclamation meal there with my artistic partners. And the whole idea behind that is to kind of use food and sensory experiences to kind of help people understand the through line of Japanese, you know, American food in their own lives. Because again, a lot of things that come out of camp specifically with food either kind of stick within people's kind of culinary repertoire, or they're like, I will never eat that again. And if you get that near me, I'm gonna fight you. So I mean, these are powerful food, and these sensory experiences are very powerful. So we're also going to be doing that at the field school. And if you have anyone who is interested in archaeology, who's in their undergrad or in their graduate program, we would love to have them to apply this year or in the next 2 years, because it's just a fantastic opportunity. So at Amache, we find a lot of different artifacts, but the ones that I love the best are the tin cans. Now, a lot of people see them and they say that's, you know, you need a tetanus shot, you know, what can it really tell you? But it can tell you so much, including like where it came from, what kind of system is Amache plugged into? Because again, we have a lot of local things within Amache that we find through survey, through excavation. There's a lot of bottled sodas and seltzers are coming from local Lamar and Grenada. However, again, we see a lot of these tin cans are from the WRA, which means they are military issue, which means they are most likely coming out from the East, unless you are getting the locally grown produce. So it can tell you kind of the economic situation that the Amaches are into. This also goes for things like metal, glass, and ceramic. You find them all over the place. And it's kind of something that, again, if you think about people vacating the camps once it's over, they're not going to take a rusty tin can, generally. Or a piece of like broken pottery, that's just going to stay. So that's a lot of the things that survive. We also do a lot of pollen and seed analysis. Again, Dr. Bonnie Clark is a fantastic researcher who does a lot of her work on the gardens of Amache, and we can understand exactly what they're growing and baking, because there is still pollen and seeds in the soil that we can do analysis on. And we found they're doing cultivars of very local plants very meaningfully. So things like succulents and kind of bushes are being used in garden landscapes. However, they're also finding seeds and other kind of plant materials that are from places like Hawaii. So that don't necessarily grow well here in Colorado. So they have to be very carefully cultivated. We also see a lot of different fun things like vinyls. We see vinyl record chunks sometimes. Those also weren't technically allowed during that time, but we find a decent enough amount. Marbles are also huge. Kids are going to be kids. They're losing things all the time, which includes marbles. And also a lot of really nice stuff that had been broken or destroyed, or just was simply made out of materials that were made before the war. That again, you can tell was important because people held on to it even through the relocation process. So for our plans for 2026, we're going to do pedestrian survey and excavation on 6 survey blocks that I've noted there in the red on the right. These are mostly on the east, and these are finishing up some of the work that we had started all the way back in like 2010. So again, this is a very longitudinal project, which has really netted us some really interesting insights into how people used and kind of thrived sometimes within the camp. But yep, so we've got about 12 students, 3 crew chiefs. Again, definitely come see us, please. It's gonna be a great time. And then we're going to the pilgrimage soon, where we are going to stay a little bit later as well and do some ground penetrating radar to figure out where some good places to dig are. So we're not kind of just going haphazard into the soil. And then, yeah, so part of the DU archaeology project also includes giving back to the community, specifically through guided block tours and interviews. This year, we're hoping to reconnect some more families. Lots of people, say they get closure and kind of like peace from seeing kind of where grandma or grandpa lived. And we also collect interviews during these times. Because you just, you never know when a memory is going to return to somebody. I talked to an older gentleman last year, and I was like, do you remember anything about food or anything in Amache? And he's like, no, not really, because he was like 5. Like, you're not forming that, these huge ideas then. But I'm like, so what did you do? And he's like, oh yeah, I remember sneaking out underneath the fence and getting soda and candy from Grenada. And it's like, oh, okay, yeah, that's awesome. But people remember things in so many different ways. So each year we just keep getting more and more. And it's just really amazing to have that experience and to kind of even help facilitate that for kind of this community. I also wanted to briefly touch a little bit on my thesis. I'm a master's student, so I get to be a little bit annoying about that. But basically, I'm looking at the way that money affected food and power at the camp of Amache. Like I said, there was a fixed maximum income at Amache during this time. However, if you went off to one of the ranches that was, or a farm that was making like sugar beets, then you could make a little bit more money. That wasn't capped by the US government. So I have the hypothesis that there may have been the beginning of the creation of a new class at Amache as people gained more money over the course of those 3 years that specifically you could look at in food choices, because food choices were often fairly poor until the end of the camp. Although, again, towards the end of 1944, the Emperor of Japan actually sends over a Red Cross shipment to Amache and the other camps of shoyu, soy sauce, and miso paste. So it's, again, everything's very much so connected. And so I'm doing this in part through creating a typology of tin cans at the site. Again, there's only so many different ways of manufacturing during this time period, so it is easy to figure out where and why something was made, and even how it was used afterwards. That's another very important thing, is you see modified tin cans all over Amache, because why pay for something like a grater or a strainer from a Sears catalog? It's going to take time. Who knows if they're even going to be able to deliver it? Or you can make it right at home, and then you're also kind of being self-resilient and kind of doing your own thing there. But in order to understand tin cans, we kind of have to go through a normal artifacts typology where we figure out, is it an artifact? Which is always a great question, especially when you're with undergrads and kids. Where it's like, oh, is this an artifact? Is this no? That's a rock. I'm so sorry. I hate to say it, and they're always so impressed. They're like, I found one finally. And it's like, no, I'm sorry. But then you have to figure out what kind of material it is, what form it is, and then details and marks. And then for tin cans, again, the last two are the most important. But also different kinds of food manifests itself as different artifacts. So it's important to keep that in mind. And again, like I said, I am in love with tin cans. These are my favorite things. Nobody else likes them. They're like another tin can. I hate it. But again, they tell you so much. So things like the seams and the solders can tell you how it was packaged and where it was packaged. You're not
to this lot, but you're welcome to go park like in either pool parking or over by the tennis courts.
Okay, thank you.
Good enough.
Yeah.
Or again, size is very important. Specifically, especially for the U.S. government, because they have manuals on all of these things. The specific size and shape can tell you almost exactly what something was. For example, a spinach can is always going to be a number 10 can with a fully around the ring closure, because it goes, well, you have to get the whole thing out, versus something like a condensed milk can will be in something closer to a 2.5, and you're going to see 2 holes in the top because you just simply pour it out. So these are fantastic, and I think more people in archaeology need to be paying attention to them, but that's just my hot take. Okay, good play, excellent. But yeah, so I wanted to end off on the so what. Why is Amache important? Why should we care? And I wanted to start, I actually put this in Megaru. This is Megaru. It is a symphony. I'm sorry, it was better in my head when I did that. Realized, but this is a symphony that was first done in Fresno, and it goes through Matsumoto's book, which is about the 4 generations of his mother's kind of matrilineal side, and each of the seasons is the Issei, the Nisei, and the Sansei. And each act kind of corresponds. And of course, winter is the Sansei, and being incarcerated. Matsumoto's family was incarcerated in Amache. So it continues to inspire people. Up left, like I said, Amache is now a National Historic Park. It's still kind of in its infant stages. I think it's only been open for 3 years. But again, it's proved itself to be a very important kind of linchpin for the Japanese American community, as well as the community of the Eastern Plains, who kind of see the joint parks of Amache and Sand Creek as kind of being important tourist vectors. Again, that's John Hopper there at one of the memorialization ceremonies. John Hopper is, of course, the school teacher who helped preserve Amache whose students really kind of came through when nobody really cared about the site or knew about it, and kind of maintained it until it was kind of, we joined forces with DU and all of these other people. And we, again, finally got it to be a national park, which now has a bit of federal funding, let's be honest. It's a national park. And then, yeah, we also see all of these different people coming out of the descendant communities who are saying never again to mass forced incarceration. This is from Suru for Peace, which includes many Amache descendants and survivors. And they've been recently using their research, our research, their stories to kind of protest against government action. Yeah, like I said, we also have indigenous folks. Again, we have a great relationship with Sand Creek and the Sand Creek descendants and survivors. For our field schools, we have an indigenous intern from the Sand Creek survivors. And again, the two groups just, again, really see a lot of relationship between their kind of people's plights. And again, they do a lot of great advocacy work and kind of research so that hopefully no other group of people has to endure this again. Excellent, that's everything. And again, thank you for putting up with my musical interlude. But yeah, any questions or concerns, statements, how we can get involved in this kind of work and process? Yes.
Questions from before that, but the Nono voice or the Nono?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was wondering what the two questions were, if you happen to remember them.
One was regarding the draft, and one was regarding the pledging themselves to the U.S. government. So basically, would you fight for the U.S. government, and do you see the U.S. government as legitimate? And they said no to both of those. And again, difficult question to ask given the time period. Yes.
Let me get this straight that you answered no to the questions, but then you talked about the no battalions, those people who said no to both?
So there's the 100th Battalion,
Right.
which consisted mostly of Japanese Americans from Amache, and then the No boys were sent to another camp. I put them together because to show that there's kind of this discourse happening within this community of should we assimilate or should we kind of be in defiance of the U.S. government?
Where was the other camp they were sent to?
That I will have to double check because that was not part of the official WRA set of camps. It was much closer to a prison camp.
Just point of interest, I don't know if people realize, there were also Japanese interned people from Mexico, Peru, all along the South American coast were sent to camps in Texas, primarily, as I understood it.
Yeah. So Canada had camps, and then the Peruvian one actually is interesting because I've been working with a community member whose parents were from Peru, who were interned at Amache, and they could not return afterwards to Peru legally. There was a lot of collaboration between the allied governments regarding that. Yeah.
Myself, I was curious why all of the camps were towards the west coast. And just bear with me. Like, were there any on the east coast, or?
Can you repeat the question, please?
Oh yeah, sorry. I was just asked why there were no camps further east, and why they were primarily on the west coast. And so the answer to that is, partially it's a logistics problem. It's easier to move people shorter distances, especially when you're in California or somewhere like that. Additionally, I do also want to note that there was one to two instances of people from the East Coast being relocated. One of which was a couple who kind of saw the way that the wind was blowing in Chicago and said, you could just relocate us. We're gonna head there voluntarily of our own accord. But also there's just a lot more land out here on the West Coast or on the West. You know, again, we have all of this BLM land. So if you just wanted to plonk down a camp, it's easy. Also, a lot of them were already on top of existing military kind of lands or fortifications, things like that. Again, Amache was weird because we just basically bought out a couple of farmers and created a camp there.
I was gonna say, there were German and Italian camps in parts of the South and in some of the East areas, so depending on if you're European faith, you know, you got interned towards more of the East, the Japanese were more interned in the West.
And you also see kind of constellations of those camps also with POW camps as well. Again, just because ease of use. Actually, during in my undergrad, one of my professors did a German POW camp. And their method of keeping people in was more or less the same, which was put it in the middle of nowhere. So if some guy rocks up to your diner speaking, German, you can be like, I know where he's from. Yes.
So what made that land valuable enough to go through the eminent domain process?
So it was because it was part of oh, I'm so sorry. So what made it, so why did the US government and the WRA, why did they use eminent domain and buy out the area of Amache? And part of that is due to the fact that, again, these are people kind of coming off of the Dust Bowl. So again, that hits Eastern Colorado really hard. So a lot of these places are kind of struggling as it is, although they are decent in terms of like actual agricultural use. It's been really hard for the last, 5-6 years for them. So it's easy to buy out. Again, it's in the middle of nowhere. Though it is, it's close to train tracks, it's close to the Arkansas River. So, and it's also on top of a plateau. So it's easy to kind of see and surveil as well. Although by about like 43, the guard towers are basically unmanned. So. Yes.
One of your bullets, you noted that special events posed an opportunity for escape. Was that much of an issue?
Yeah. I mean, for one, it is. It is an awful place to live for one, because what they do is they basically level the entirety of the site when they do that. And out on the Eastern Plains, the soil is already not that great. So if you take off that layer of grasses and trees, you are left with a sandy mess. And again, a lot of these people are also not from, a similar climate, environment, things like that. So it's cold winters, it's very hot summers. It's nothing like, say, the Bay or the Central Valley. So kind of when they have these events like Lunar New Year, it is this time where everybody is speaking Japanese. It's where you're inside. They do have decorations as well. So, it is very, it's very important. And again, while there are kind of worse camps, obviously, going on during a lot of World War II, both in terms of the US and outside of it, it is still kind of a bleak experience, especially with not knowing how long this is going to take. So by kind of reaffirming one's culture and, doing things like picnics or birthdays, it really can kind of help. Yes.
Okay. What is your favorite thing that you've discovered so far? And is there a particular dish that you really think to make?
Yes. Thank you. Yes. This is, I have one, and I really should have put it in, and I'll have to find it, but it is basically the lid of a number 10 tin can. So just kind of It's one of the big boys. And it has all of these puncture holes in it going one way, and it's folded over. So it kind of looks like almost like a tortilla that's kind of there. And we didn't know what it was for the longest time. And we had one of our descendants who was there, and she was like, "Oh, that's a daikon grater. It's which is a daikon is kind of like a root vegetable that's grated. So basically, their whole thing is, they're growing this in their victory gardens or on whatever agricultural plots they have. And then they're cooking, that's something we see a lot, is that they're cooking inside of their barracks a lot, because a lot of the time the food is very, very bad. Because again, it's all people who are living in the camp, who are working on the camp. And if you don't have a whole, you don't go through and be like, okay, we're gonna send 6 chefs over here. They're like, you're a carpenter, now you're gonna be a chef, so better learn quick. So there's even stories of kids, because you're not supposed to go between mess halls. Your mess hall and your block is yours, but kids will go between because they're all gossiping and they're like, okay, 5E has really good food. Like, he knows what he's doing. Let's go over there. So, I mean, it's just, that's kind of the thing I love about this intersection between history and archaeology. And, having these interviews is we can put all of them together and they create something that's a little bit bigger than the sum of its parts. And then, what was the second part of your question?
Particular dish that you hope to recreate for the reclamation dinner.
Okay, the dish I hope to recreate from the reclamation dinner. It's something called onigiri. It's a rice, basically a rice ball that has filling inside of it. And it has seaweed, and we have, again, evidence from the archaeology and the interviews that we've done that people were making these in their barracks, because it's kind of easy to put together. Everybody likes it. And again, if you've just had like a really, really bad meal, it's definitely something that's nice to kind of come home to and have feel a little bit, not incarcerated. Yes.
During the 3 years of operation of the camp, I'm sure there were people that died there. Have you done any excavation to find out any grave sites there?
Okay, so yes. So there were, the question was there people that died at Amache, and have we done any kind of research or digs for them? And the answer is yes, there were a decent amount of people who died at Amache. Almost all of them were from natural causes. In that central picture right there, there's the monument that has some of the names of the people who had died there. The thing is, fortunately, we do know where everyone is, so there is kind of no need to kind of poke around in there, as it were. But we do know where every individual is. Most of them died of old age, a lot. Also, a decent amount of children died from nutrition-related issues. Again, because this is a military operation at its core, there is no U.S. military handbook for feeding children, and so that doesn't also factor into courses and nutrients. So it is an unfortunate part of the experience. Also, there were 2 other incarcerees who were shot, one of which was a deaf man at Manzanar, who was outside the fence chasing his dog, and obviously could not hear the yelled instructions and was killed. So again, this is also why the pilgrimage is so important, is because people's descendants, people's grandparents are here. And so it kind of becomes almost a sacred space in that kind of sort of way. Yes.
You mentioned something about the Boy Scouts. Was there a Boy Scout troop at Amache?
Oh yeah, there was a Boy Scout troop, and they had a clubhouse. It was the old Red Cross building because they ended up making a larger one further away. But yeah, there's a Boy Scout troop, all Amache related, or all Amache boys. And again, Amache was quite a porous camp for a lot of its tenure. So yeah, a lot of the Boy Scouts, they went on, like I said, they went to Mesa Verde. They did Eagle Scout projects inside the camp and outside of the camp and in Grenada. And yeah, they kind of went, I think they even went camping with other Boy Scout troops inside, with in Prowers County as well. So yeah, they're having a good time, or a good enough time. Yes.
When the camps closed, were there some of them that stayed there in that area? Because there used to be a Japanese family that had a big farm down there. And they used to have a farm stand along the highway, and I always heard that they were descendants of some of the ones that were in camp.
Yeah, so some people did stay. I don't believe a large proportion stayed specifically in the Grenada, kind of like Prowers County area. But there were definitely a lot of people who did ultimately, again, stay because they had grown accustomed to doing farming in the area, in the environment. Again, they had done very well. They had held agricultural fairs where people got multiple blue ribbons. But also a lot of people stayed in like the major metropolitan areas as well. Because again, for a lot of these people, they had nothing to go home to. Businesses and farms and homes were foreclosed on. So the emptying out of the camps took a lot of time too. But in places like Denver, I know specifically because nobody had to leave Denver who's of Japanese origin. They kept all of their institutions intact. So the restaurants, the community centers, places like the Japanese American Citizens League weren't made to shut down. So it was a very easy place to get jobs afterwards as well in Denver. So because again, Ralph Carr was a pretty good guy in that regard. Yes.
Were the people who were interned, were they ever given any compensation?
So the question was, were the Japanese Americans ever given compensation? And this was a fight for a long time until I believe it was the 1980s, where they were given, descendants and survivors were given reparations by the Reagan administration, I believe, or yeah, I think Reagan. Weirdly enough, I use history as but yeah, so they were given reparations. However, it was, it obviously did not cover a lot of what people had lost, either monetarily, in terms of property, or in terms of things like relationships, and kind of things that couldn't be taken with them. Also, but that is also another kind of interesting thing that I would like to look at with my thesis, is that kind of everybody, when they get to Amache, starts at the same kind of points. You all have one suitcase, you all have like a barrack. So it is kind of this very equitable situation for a long time, where everybody's kind of in the same pot, whether they want to or not. Yeah.
I was interested if I understood your thesis correctly. In some of the internment received more or had more by their actions, and there was sort of this social structure perhaps within the camp itself. And given the Japanese strict social class system, where such as the Burakumin, those who work with death, are considered lower class, did that manifest itself in the camps? Do we have any kind of record of that, where some of that carried over?
So again, the question is about my thesis and kind of social and kind of economic hierarchies in the camp. And so we do see that some people are able to utilize their social capital, especially in terms of different committees and things within the camp. So again, a lot of the people who were successful businessmen outside of the camp soon formed many of the kind of bodily parts of the committees of the camp, even if they weren't physically rich anymore. And then in terms of other ways that manifested, we haven't quite seen, again, there is a rural-urban divide that we see in some of the interviews where, again, a lot of the jobs that are available at the camp are primarily agriculturally related. So there's a great interview with a city girl who's talking about her experience having to pull sugar beets and just feeling like, she's kind of, unfortunately, she's feeling worthless because she's there kind of going one at a time. And there's this other girl from like the Central Valley who is just, going, and she's got, the whole bushel or whatever. So it's never something that's so big that, there's any kind of meaningful tension in terms of like fights or disagreements or anything like that, but definitely something we're still trying to figure out too.
Yes, in your museum, you had a portfolio at Amache. You had a portfolio of interni artworks. I'm concerned about how they are conserved.
Yeah, this is a great question about interni art and artworks. Amache was an absolute hotspot of the arts. Again, they had a silk printing studio there where they produced not only parachutes for the war effort, but also, again, just artistic prints of the surrounding areas. They also had multiple art classes which went on, specifically in one of the mess halls when it was not being used. And that includes the works of Tokyo Uyama, who was a classically trained Japanese American and Western artist who did some fantastic watercolors. So things like that are in the hands of a private collector, and also recently the Denver Museum of Art. So some of them are being held in quite high regard. Others are living in the museum, and every year we, at the field school, we have the chance to actually educate students on how to properly care for things like artwork and things like that, because they were also, again, they were making art with what they had, which sometimes included things that fall apart very easily. So there's a lot of time and effort that goes into making sure that is preserved. But it has been an amazing piece of data as well for researchers like me, because Tokyo Uyama did a lot of still lives, and still lives have food in them. And so that helps kind of to connect the dots, and it's just kind of another way of looking at kind of the vast landscape that was the camp.
That book that my wife actually read first, and I read, it was called An Enemy Amongst Friends. If anybody is interested in the story of a guy who was a college student when the war started, and he couldn't get back to Japan, so he was he was put in the internment camp, and then eventually they released him as long as he went to a school back east. He couldn't go west; he could go east. But he was really interested in reading the book about how he was treated, how he felt he was treated here. And at the end of the book, he talks about going back to Japan after the war and meeting with American students who were trapped over in Japan, and the differences in the way that they were treated.
Yeah, no, that's a great comment about kind of especially the bit about going to school out east, because there is this push by the Quakers are actually working with schools out east to get Japanese kids into East Coast universities, so that because that's one of the ways you get out of camp is you go to you go to Brown, or I don't know, I'm not remembering any East Coast universities now, but yeah, no, I mean we get almost, I think, 1,000 or 2,000 people out of the camps just by working with these universities. The other ways were, again, to relocate to another place east of the exclusion zone. This is very hard because Pearl Harbor just happened. Not many people want to sell land or to rent out to Japanese American folks. So not really many people are able to take that route. The other one is to kind of get gainful employment with a family member. So that means that you're staying with them. And again, that's why a lot of Japanese Americans relocate out to Denver immediately after Pearl Harbor of their own volition, just so that they don't have to be incarcerated, because the writing was on the wall at the time. But yeah, Quakers actually were a part of that 1% that I talked about at the top of the hour. Was like who opposed it. That was mostly Quakers. They were a huge force in protesting it and for justice. Any other questions? Yes.
I heard that one of the ways that eating celebrated was parents would turn naturally sweet and then use like the last emergency reserve of sugar to lollipops in other parts of the world. So I was wondering, for one, if it was at all celebrated or if there was a day like that of celebration where food got to kind of be used as a treat.
So we don't have any records of how people reacted to kind of, the Victory in Japan Day or Germany. People are definitely very excited, especially at the German surrender, because that means that, again, the war has kind of started to end. Things are wrapping up. I will say that, especially for like special occasions, those really crappy mess hall cooks are really good for one thing, and that's burning rice. And burning rice is really, really important to making sake. So we found evidence in the not mess halls, but the latrines, because they're in places with hot water, with running water, and that, not many people are coming into or out of, at certain times of day. So we see evidence of sake brewing there. And so again, at important times like Lunar New Year, or I would assume when that Red Cross kind of meal kind of came in, people were very excited and kind of were, they were like, how can I, haven't had miso in so long. How will what will I use it for? But, food is just such an important thing. And like some people will, they really associate spam musubi with special events, which is rice spam that has been cooked and then seaweed kind of in a little sandwich looking thing. And people really like that, because it's neat. It tastes great, but it was also served during important times versus when things were low. They had a lot of what was called weenie royale, which, if I'm remembering correctly, was hot dogs and eggs and ketchup, which is great. And again, people, descendants, when we ask them about it, they will still say, oh, I don't really remember that much, but I will never eat that again in my life. Which is fair. They also found as the camp was closing down, they were like trying to sell off everything that included canned items, and they had found a can of navy beans that had been there since the start of the camp. Because it was just so not part of like the Japanese American foodscape. They were like, we don't know what to do with this. We don't want to do anything with this. You can have it. Thank you very much. So, it's incredible when you start talking to people how much food and memory really, it makes sense, right? We've all had like a meal that reminds us of, a special person or the worst day of our lives or something. And that's just compounded now for, the people of Amache and their descendants. Yes.
I was curious, what was the economy and the government like in Japan at the time of Pearl Harbor or prior to Pearl Harbor?
So you're asking about the economy in really the U.S. and Japan.
Or Japan, more so. What caused the exodus of so many people to come?
So again, they industrialized soon after their reopening, which meant that a lot of what would have been communally held kind of farmland got turned into either stuff for manufacturing or for kind of more intensive agriculture that relied on less people. You also combine that with the fact that in Japan at that time, specifically second sons were set to inherit almost nothing. So if you're in a big family, big bro is going to get the rice farm or, the plum grove or whatever, and you're going to have to be a laborer. So it might be just a better idea to go to America and try it out there. You also have, Japan is also a tiny island nation to begin with. So as that kind of starts to really grow, it becomes just untenable to have all of these people. Additionally, you see some persecution as well. There are some Japanese who convert to Catholicism or Christianity from the monks there, and they kind of face repression. And that's kind of where one of the colonies in the Central Valley actually comes from, is from Protestant Japanese Americans. They were very strict, they said, no dancing, no drinking, no doing anything. We were working hard. And, that community is still there. But yeah, so Japan was looking very, it was they were industrializing, and that's never a fun thing to go through as an individual person.
Were they allies with Germany? Japan allies with Germany?
Japan was allies with
Yes.
during World War II, but up until then, it was kind of, they were isolationists, and then they were kind of figuring out their alliances, specifically in relation to Russia, because they fought a lot over the Kurils and then later Manchuria. So they were also kind of alliances of just enemy of my enemy is my friend kind of deal, until they landed on Germany, and then we know that's another story. Yeah.
Are there are there records of agricultural practices, either pre-internment camp or?
Yeah. So the question is about agricultural practices prior to and during internment. And so there is some really, really great literature from a lot of these Central Valley families about, again, how they came to work there. A lot of them were almond farmers. And then during internment, we have both the WRA, they are sending monthly kind of reports back to the government saying this is how many bushels, how many things, this is exactly what we need. And then on top of that, we can also see from the menus that we have exactly how much food is being consumed and where that's coming from. So again, if in a menu, they're saying like, we have fresh tomatoes, that's coming from really close by. So yeah.
They've done a wonderful job. Remember all people.